Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan Pereira. Face app, an image editing app, has caught the imagination of everyone from New York to Sydney, from Brussels to Chennai and beyond. There are millions of people, including several in India, who are transforming their current photographs using the app's age filter to see what they will look like when they are old. And these people are also sharing these photos on social media. The problem, however, is that just with any other app that uses personal data, such as a photograph, there are privacy concerns around FaceApp. A number of people have raised concerns, including a US senator who wants the app investigated by the FBI for possible data misuse. The primary issue seems to be a clause in the terms and conditions of FaceApp. This clause says users give FaceApp a perpetual, irrevocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide, fully paid, transferable, sub-licensable license to use photos they upload. Similar fears were raised when the trend of the 10-year challenge went viral on Facebook in January this year. In this, people uploaded their photos from 10 years earlier to show how they changed. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how safe are apps. Joining me on the program today are Subi Chaturvedi, distinguished public policy professional, Karnika, Seth, cyber law expert, and Subimal, Bhattacharjee, cyber security expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Subi Chaturvedi, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and understand and try to put into perspective how safe are some of these apps that we keep downloading almost on a hourly basis on our phones.
Frank, let's all remember 1984, and people thought this was a dystopian idea of cameras looking at us and you not being able to even think your thoughts before they go public. Now, when we're looking at a lot of these apps, they have permissions which they do not require and which should not be intrinsic to their functioning. So a contact management program, when it asks you for permission to access your camera to read your text, your instinct and your response should be a firm no. While we're accessing these apps for fun, the idea of wanting to know how you or your partner would look 10 years down the line, it's greatly amusing. It's seen a lot of traction from common people to actors to politicians. Everybody's had a go and we've all had a good laugh. But it is very important that when we use FaceApp as the catalyst for putting this conversation forward, we're looking at issues which are largely 5 or 6 in nature. Who has access to your information? What kind of permissions are you giving? If you take this conversation further, we're also, for the sake of convenience and efficiency and for saving time, we end up taking up extensions and we add them to our browsers. That's another very big conversation. Everything that you browse, whether it's in the incognito mode, when you think you're supposedly safe, these extensions are leaking data to companies whose entire business model resides on the fact that they know which sites you visited, what have you been browsing. Similarly, in the case of FaceApp, though Washington Post reached out to the CEO of FaceApp, but the fact that it is a Russian made app, the data resides in Russia, the engineers are there, they're looking at algorithms. So what you've effectively done is you've given not just access to an app of your face, of your name and your email, though they say that you can access it without sending your name or your email. And after 48 hours, they're claiming that most of the photos are deleted. Now, this is a huge space which is vague in terms of their privacy commitment. And let me also go back to what you just said. It's irrevocable, it can be sub-licensed, and it is stored for perpetuity. So even if you were to delete the app after you've had your fun,
once it's on the servers,
it's there for perpetuity. And let me remind you that when we're looking at questions around elections, when we're looking at questions around democracy, so not just where is your data stored, who stores it, which are the laws, which are the countries which will be governed by those laws, and then who has access to this data and for how long. So we've seen Facebook budgeting in $5 billion US because they knew that sanctions were coming. They knew that they would have to cuff up these penalties. But the fact is that the business model hasn't changed. You've heard a lot of lip service. You've heard a lot of people saying saying that we will be looking at privacy as a very serious issue.
Right.
Now, I want to bring this really important point forward. As a consumer, you need to make informed choices, and we also need to start demanding that privacy pages are not buried on page 100 or 200 of the app when we're looking at agreements. So simpler form which puts upfront as to what's the trade-off. I can't say that we should go back to the dark ages. We're smart consumers. We use technology to make our life more efficient and productive. But we also need to know what is it that you're giving up. So
Absolutely.
do you need to install the app, or can you do with an extension or a shortcut which is a desktop that simulates the app? What is it that you're losing? And we also need to be more aware and more demanding as consumers. What are the negotiations, what are the terms of agreement, and what really do you lose when you look at these concerns? And these are very real concerns.
Sure. I think every consumer can start by starting to read the T&Cs first, and then decide whether they want to use that app or not. Karnika, Seth, so what is the kind of information that some of these apps really extract?
Well, as rightly put by Subi, it is a lot of information that they're taking away. Sometimes even the geolocation, where are you, really posting a particular photograph from, and the name of the person, the email ID. They could even have access to your photo gallery. So they take a lot of information of who you are, who are your close friends, your relatives, what you're doing, and what is your lifestyle. And all this information could be sold. The point is that if there is a click wrap agreement where you go and sign, you've probably not even read the terms and conditions carefully, which you ought to do, and you click on I agree, and it just forms a click wrap agreement. You've given away all your consent for taking away all this information. Sometimes it is only the information that is mentioned in the term. Sometimes it may be more than that. So what is the security, and who are they answerable to? If it's a Russian app, it's stored in, say, US servers, what law applies here? We are Indian citizens. We have Article 21 to protect us under the Constitution. The right to privacy ought to be respected. Knowing this, that the Sri Krishna Committee, Justice Sri Krishna Committee is now given the report, and there is a PDP bill which is under process, and there will be a discussion. We are bound to have a stronger law in the country. Nevertheless, we do have some privacy laws in the country which even today take care of the legal framework and the way the privacy ought to be protected to some extent. However, enforcement is a challenge. As I said, there is no convention. I've advocated this time and again. There is no convention India has signed with countries abroad on cybercrime.
Okay, we seem to have some technical difficulty with the line there, so let me move on to Subimal Bhattacharjee now. So, we know what is the kind of information that is taken from the users, but how is this information then further used and processed, Subimal?
So, I think as I've heard both the ladies, it's very clear, that most of the apps are collecting information, various kinds of information, and you draw your own discretion about which app you actually subscribe or you try to avoid. Now there is no thumb rule as such about whom are you choosing, and also so that gap actually creates more of the fear. We are talking about FaceTime. We have had the issue of TikTok. Now if you see, one is of Russian make, one is of Chinese make. Most of the issues actually come around anything that is you can't generalize it, but more or less which are non-US. But there are a lot of these US-based intermediaries and apps that are collecting far much more information also as such. We feel very convinced that possibly they are far much more secure. Any app has its own level of insecurity. It's a question of what you are passing and how judiciously you are passing. Now coming to your question, that where does it go further? Despite all the privacy policies, despite all the legal agreements, despite whatever the intermediary has done, yet it is seen that leakages are happening. Leakages are happening for various reasons. Somewhere the employees are passing on, somewhere the entity itself is looking this as a big marketing avenue to pass on, and now in this age of AI, everywhere this is going big time in terms of enhancing a lot of parameters for many other entities. So I think, as Karnika said, law has to really pick up. Law, I think whatever laws we have, we are still again waiting for some of the changes to the intermediary guidelines also that were introduced in 2018. So we have to be strict on them. We have to understand what the back end is, and at the end of the day, the technical community also has a responsibility to see that somewhere the leakages and all are far much better plugged, or at least understood at a level where they do not become really a havoc. Now, why FaceTime is so popular, 150 million downloads in the last 1 week, it's it has a lot of it has a lot of humor element to it. It's something that people are able to see
relate
something
to,
in the future. So obviously you cannot take the advantage away of such kind of thing. And more people getting into the net, more and more people looking into the apps. One of the easiest thing to do, mobile internet is everyone's flavor now. So I think we'll have to deal with it as it comes. There is no hard and fast rule in terms of this is the right method and no one can take away. It's a mix of everything, a dynamically evolving medium. Only thing is that one has to be very judicious about understanding what that app is seeking for, and if at all that is pertinent to what is being sought, and accordingly judiciously decide about one's particular dashboard,
right,
under which you can accept what is being done.
Absolutely. So before we get to the best way forward in trying to deal with issues of privacy, data and cybersecurity, since the trigger is FaceApp, of course, let's spend a couple of minutes on FaceApp. Subi, so as far as the privacy concerns surrounding this particular app are concerned, are they justified, especially considering the clarifications that have been given by the by the app's higher ups?
Frank, I think we need to look beyond rhetoric and what is being said versus what truly happens. When you use words like irrevocable, you also use words like sub-licensing, and you also use words like perpetuity. You are now claiming as the app developer that I will not sell this information further, but what as a consumer you've effectively done is you've given up your face, you've also given up your details. Many people say that they've not shared their email, but many of them insist that yes, they've put in their email, they've put in their data, and this has now gone on their cloud. So even if you decide to delete this app, your information is not going away. Your information stays with them. The alternate which has been suggested is they've not been able to figure out a better, more user-friendly way of deleting all your information. So they're saying go to support and say bug and say privacy, and then we're going to look into it and we'll start removing or fleshing out your detail. Now, if we look at some numbers, India has got about 940 million unique mobile connections, about 450 million people are online, and now with Jio, data has become inexpensive, our consumptions have gone up, and most of our first experiences on the internet are for entertainment, whether it's YouTube or whether it's looking for songs or whether it's making videos. Our experience now in terms of digital literacy needs to be enhanced. And if I were looking at these issues, and we do that with a lens, we do that with focus, I would be very concerned. When you give up your rights, you're also creating a digital footprint. You're also allowing, so you asked before what happens to this data. Every single site that you visit, every conversation that you have, the moment you've got extensions, the moment you've given access to your cameras, these fears are not unreal. This data is being sold to people whose business models rest on consumer choices. They want to know you, they want your voice samples, they want your face samples. So if I were to paint a picture, if many neighborhoods are now putting in CCTV cameras, there are products which are also allow CCTV cameras in doorbells. We need to get into this conversation much deeper, because they're opting in voluntarily to share this information and these images with law and order enforcement agencies. Now, if all works well, you're enhancing safety of a community, but if it doesn't, what you're effectively doing is 24/7 you're giving access to your neighborhoods, your communities, who's visiting, and then you're also giving access to the choices that you're making. Our fears won't be unreal when we say that foreign actors, state sponsored or non-state actors, have meddled in democracies. We've just had elections, the biggest elections that we've seen across the world, even bigger than the US, if I might add. There's a lot of money that gets exchanged. Opinions, issues and causes. So not are you, in Noam Chomsky's words, manufacturing consent, you're also manufacturing outrage, you're also manufacturing hatred, you're also manufacturing dissent. So what kind of, and we've seen this with popular social networking apps, that whether on your timeline, whether you're going to feel happy or sad, those experiments have also happened. So my larger worry is, you're not just giving up privacy. You know, one of the famous professors said, if somebody were to project what's on my WhatsApp in the classroom, I won't have an issue because I'm not anti-national. The framing of this conversation that I have nothing to hide, so therefore everybody should have access to everything that I do, is a very scary, very slippery slope. Therefore, when we talk about legal frameworks, in a country like India, which is opening up its economy, there's reciprocity. We need to be very careful as to what kind of a draft we want, and there has to be enough and more public stakeholder inputs going into this draft. So while the report is really commendable, but the draft has not seen any discussions or open houses so far. So we need rigorous debate. We also need to be very careful. I have this t-shirt rule. Whatever I'm not putting up on my t-shirt is not going up on my social media accounts. So opinions, your digital footprint and what you would share and what you would not share, you need to be very careful about it.
Sure. All right. So, Karnika said, that having been said, so what's the best way forward then? Do we need better policies? Do we need better laws? How do we safeguard against this particular issue?
So we can't deny access to technology. It will only grow, and we should be happy to take on AI and machine learning and other newer technologies today. However, the social media rage as it is, we should be beneficiaries of it rather than feeling victimized by it. So in my view, it's very important to regulate social media to some extent, especially when it comes to child pornography. There have been efforts recently, there was a judgment also by the Supreme Court on it. So we have made certain efforts. Government is probably using DNA, photo hashing or other mechanisms to control the spread of this cyber pornography, especially child pornography. Similarly, when it comes to fake news, there have been some advisories. But or if it is blue whale, for instance, we need to, however, make a good regulation rather than just come up with advisories as and when required. So that has to be a very strategic and a very thought of process, and in compliance with law of the land. So that's the need of the hour, according to me, and we should gear up for doing this while we balance the rights and duties of citizens, stakeholders, industry, the intermediaries who are hosting companies, or even the manufacturers of this content. So it's important to balance out all of that while respecting the rights of privacy of citizens as well. So that's how I feel about it, and one should have a progressive approach rather than a regressive approach in today's world. Okay, have a progressive approach and not a regressive approach, especially in today's day and age, is what Karnika Seth is suggesting. I'll just come to you before that. Subimal, on this issue of artificial intelligence, so as apps get smarter, can new technology also be used to try and address cybersecurity issues? Absolutely. I think that's always the intent, and on many directions, AI is also being used to bolster cybersecurity. Now, along with the technological push that is being looked at cybersecurity, I think I'd love the term that she used. We should be progressive and regressive, because you cannot stop the apps getting in. More new apps will coming in, and everyone will bring its own share of happiness and sadness and maybe even the uniqueness. Risks. Yes, but what is also important is what are we doing in terms of more than the legal part, some of the aspects, how we can regulate or how we can have a certain sense of comfort having it in the country. For example, data localization is being spoken in a big way. There is a lot of opposition from all the big players that are there in the world in terms of all the large American companies. So now how are we going to take it forward? Because
at the end of the day, you know, as she mentioned about digital footprints, everything is going out, getting stored somewhere. We are assuming that, you know, in fact, many of the data arguments against the data localization is that security might become an issue if more of the data localization happens in India. I don't think so. I think what we also need to be very, very careful is that how we are able to handle this data, particularly the whole aspects of where do we store them, who has access to them. I don't think our track record with Aadhaar is bad. That is a good example, you know, whatever anyone might be complaining about, but we have a repository that is still clear, clean, and possibly, you know, in my lifetime we won't see that can be breached. So I would think that some of the steps that we are taking, the mix of law, the mix of regulation, the enhancement of technological standards and all, I think that's a direction that will keep us still in the progressive path. And I don't think that, you know, we should really become fearful, or I think more essential is to build the alertness, and that alertness is a big time, you know, PPP nature kind of an activity where all the app providers, all the, you know, people who are now allowing us, for example, the banking sector, what is really the investments they are making in reaching out to the consumers about how, you know, what should be a best practice and all. So these are the kind of things that we should foster, because after all, more and more people are going to come to the net, and one of the first points of coming to the net is through the apps, and again through the apps that she mentioned about entertainment part. So the easy things, you know, that we can see attracts us more, and people are very gullible, you know, the innocent, simple people who are coming to the net, his last worry is about security. People who get used to
convenience first.
Absolutely. People who get used to it then think of security and all, and then too, you know, there are a lot of laxities.
Absolutely, so, and especially when we are looking at digital India as well and giving it a push, these are some issues that will come up and have to be addressed. So since we are here, closing comments now from all my guests with the best way forward and how we can, you know, get a mix, get a good balance really as far as this particular issue is concerned. Subi, starting with you.
Thank you, Frank. Frank, I think I've been a huge votary of the internet, and its interoperability, its universality, and most of all, the ability to innovate without permission. And there's a term for it, it's called permissionless innovation. We've seen responses of governments in most cases. They've not really engaged with internet as a space. As far as telecom is concerned, we've had a huge success. Now, when we start looking at internet governance, whether it was the Muzaffarnagar riots or the Bangalore Northeast exodus that happened, the response is usually to control. And I think while we'd all like to see the internet in some form or fashion being regulated, we need less government and more governance, and we need to look at light touch governance. So you cannot really regulate the internet. What is important is create more avenues and more opportunities where stakeholders, and I think it's incumbent upon civil society, media, private sector, academia to engage with the government on an everyday basis. What is of great news is the government's focus on digital, on JAM, the Trinity and the open stack, which has made many innovations possible. So I think they're listening. I've seen bureaucrats who are very welcome and forthcoming, and if we can inform and engage and constantly make people aware that this is how the productivity, safety and security can be enhanced, this is the most beautiful and the most liberating thing that we can have as a tool for measure. So let us be progressive, let us embrace technology, let us also put India first, and let us look at internet as a global whole and not a sum of its parts.
Absolutely. Embrace technology and be careful as well going forward. Karnika?
Important for us to educate the children, especially the school students. At this point, the young generation is using these apps time in, day out, and it's very essential to give them the right etiquette and best practices education. Number two, it's very important for the experts to be a part of the PPP discussions, as again we were discussing that it's very essential for the practical experience of the challenges faced by internet to have a say or to have a consideration while framing these laws. And many times when their government is sitting and discussing these laws, maybe the right stakeholder engagement is not represented. That's very essential to have those experts from various industries come and talk about it, and that will lead to a successful implementable law. That's how I feel about it. We definitely need to be progressive, not regressive, as I said.
Okay, all right. And Subimal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think both laws and technology need attention. Their intermix also needs a special attention. I think the personal data protection bill as well as the the draft intermediary guidelines, they really need to move in first. I think within the intermediaries laws also the provision, one particular provision of having a presence in India with more than 50 lakh subscribers, that's a good move, but there would be far much more intervention that has to be made from a legal and regulatory perspective. The reach of technology, the explanation of basic technology to the masses, to the vulnerable sections is very, very crucial. And most importantly, again, I repeat what I said earlier, I think an outreach program to educate people, as more and more people get in, that is very, very crucial. So somewhere that funding mechanism, whether through CSR, whether through the government machinery or public sector undertaking, the corporates, everything, they have to get involved in this. Otherwise, the whole story of digital India will have too many hiccups, to be responding to and reacting to rather than moving progressively.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.